In 2023, South Korea recorded a total fertility rate of 0.72. That is the lowest ever measured for any country in recorded modern history. For a population to replace itself, the rate needs to sit at roughly 2.1. Korea is less than halfway there. The government has spent the equivalent of roughly $200 billion on pro-natalist policies since 2006. That is more than most countries spend on entire defense budgets over a similar period, and yet the number keeps falling. So the question is not simply why Koreans are having fewer children. The question is why nearly 2 decades of aggressive spending has moved the needle in the wrong direction. Consider what 0.72 actually means in practice. According to Statistics Korea, the number of live births in 2023 fell to approximately 230,000. Compared to nearly 700,000 in 1970. The population of Seoul itself has been shrinking since 2010. The OECD average fertility rate sits at around 1.5, already below replacement. Korea is roughly half that. Korea's spending on family support as a share of GDP has grown substantially, and by some government estimates, total cumulative pro-natalist expenditure from 2006 to 2023 crossed 280 trillion Korean won. That converts to well over $200 billion. Japan, facing its own demographic crisis, spends aggressively too. Yet its fertility rate of around 1.2 looks almost robust by comparison. The gap between investment and outcome in Korea is, by any measure, historically unusual. The policies themselves were not irrational. Cash bonuses for newborns, subsidized daycare, extended parental leave. These are standard tools that have shown modest results in countries like Sweden and France. But Korea applied them to a society that had been reshaped by forces the cash could not touch. Housing costs in Seoul roughly doubled between 2010 and 2022, according to the KB Real Estate Price Index. Education spending per child is among the highest in the OECD, driven largely by private tutoring, what Koreans call Hagwon culture. A 2023 survey by the Korea Institute for Health and Social Affairs found that the single most cited reason young adults gave for not having children was the cost of raising them, not the absence of government support. Women, meanwhile, face a labor market where the gender wage gap remains one of the widest in the OECD. Having a child still carries a measurable career penalty for mothers. The incentives were real, but the underlying structure of Korean society made having children feel economically and professionally irrational, and a one-time cash payment could not change that calculation. The consequences are now arriving faster than the policies predicted. According to the Bank of Korea, the working-age population peaked around 2020 and has been contracting since. By 2070, Statistics Korea projects the total population could fall from its current 51 million to somewhere below 37 million, assuming no significant change in trends. The pension system faces structural strain, fewer contributors supporting more retirees. The Korean military has already begun discussing reduced conscription pools. Some rural counties have seen school closures accelerate sharply, with the Korean Educational Development Institute reporting hundreds of elementary schools shuttered over the past decade due to insufficient enrollment. Industries reliant on domestic consumption, from retail to construction, are quietly modeling for decades of shrinkage. Immigration remains politically contentious, and inflows are far too small to offset the demographic gap. The government is not facing a future problem, it is managing a present one. Korea is not an anomaly, it is an accelerant, a version of a pattern appearing across wealthy East Asia and increasingly in Southern and Eastern Europe. The lesson is uncomfortable. Economic development, once it reaches a certain intensity, appears to suppress fertility by making individual ambition and parenthood feel mutually exclusive. No country has reversed a sub-1 fertility rate with transfers alone. What Korea's experiment suggests is that cash addresses the symptom, not the structure. The real variables, housing affordability, gender equity in the workplace, educational cost pressure, and the social meaning of success, are slower and harder to move than any budget line. Policymakers in Berlin, Tokyo, Rome, and Beijing are watching Seoul carefully. The $200 billion lesson is that throwing money at a cultural and structural problem does not solve it. It only confirms how deep the problem runs.